Four California kids faked a Southern accent and went head-to-head with the Beatles. 9 top 10 hits in 2 years, yet never a single #1. A curse that haunted them forever. Woodstock footage that could have made them immortal vanished. A brother sided with their record label instead of his own family. Another was sued for plagiarizing himself. At the Hall of Fame, bandmates walked out mid-ceremony. Decades of lawsuits followed. Brothers destroyed, fortunes stolen, legacy fractured. This is the rise and fall of Creedence Clearwater Revival. El Cerrito, California, 1959. Not the swamps of Louisiana, not the Mississippi Delta. Just another working-class suburb in the Bay Area where 4 high school friends decided they could be something more than what their circumstances promised them. John Fogerty, his older brother Tom, bassist Stu Cook, and drummer Doug Clifford formed the Blue Velvets in a garage like thousands of other teenagers across America. But there was something different about these 4. They weren't chasing the experimental psychedelia exploding around them in the San Francisco. They wanted something rawer, something older, early rock and roll, rhythm and blues, southern blues, the foundational sounds of American music. For nearly a decade, they ground it out. Day jobs, military service, name changes from the Blue Velvets to the Gollywogs. Tom Fogerty worked as a packing clerk at Fantasy Records, the label that would eventually make them stars and then become their greatest enemy. The irony was already being written into their story. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Then came the interruption that would change everything. Between 1966 and 1968, John Fogerty and Doug Clifford were drafted into the U.S. Army Reserve during the height of Vietnam. John became a supply clerk, marching at Fort Knox in 1967, enduring what he later called transcendental meditation or delirium. Hours of marching where musical lyrics would dance around inside his head, sharpening his focus, deepening his resolve. But it was more than just creative time. John watched the television news from the barracks. He saw the stories about wealthy men avoiding the draft, about senators getting their sons exemptions, while working-class kids like him had no choice but to serve. That anger, that sense of profound injustice, burned itself into his consciousness. It would fuel the most powerful protest songs of his generation. When John was discharged in 1968, the band renamed itself Creedence Clearwater Revival. The name itself was a statement. Credence, meaning belief, Clearwater, suggesting purity, and revival, promising rebirth. John's voice was now the dominant force. His songs, his vision, his absolute control. The long struggle of the garage band era, rooted in hope and blue-collar grit, had finally produced something extraordinary. But that same control would eventually destroy everything they built.
Oh, Susie Q, baby, I love you.
While the Bay Area exploded with psychedelic experimentation, CCR delivered something completely different. No lengthy jams, no studio excess, just tight, minimalist, rhythm, and blues-infused rock with what critics called a crunching R&B sound and a haunting way with blues. Their first major success came with a Susie Q, an extended jam that gained traction on FM radio and peaked at number 11 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was the sound of 3 instruments and a voice creating something that felt ancient and immediate at the same time. But the real explosion came in January 1969 with their second album, Bayou Country, and its lead single backed by Born on the Bayou. Proud Mary catapulted them to number 2 on the Billboard charts. The genius of the song was its deceptive simplicity, that unforgettable opening guitar riff, John's distinctive growl, and lyrics about leaving a good job in the city to catch a riverboat. It sounded like it came straight from the Mississippi Delta, but it was written by a kid from California who'd never been south. This was the birth of swamp rock, and it tapped into something deep in the American psyche. Working-class listeners, military personnel fighting in Vietnam, factory workers, they heard themselves in this music. It wasn't pretentious or inaccessible. It was honest, hard-driving rock that spoke their language. When CCR appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1969, reviewers noted they looked like men standing in the bar rather than glamorous rock stars. That blue-collar image wasn't an act. It was who they were, and it resonated with millions of Americans who felt left behind by the excess and experimentation of the psychedelic era. But beneath the unity projected by their music was a structural flaw that was already forming cracks in the foundation. John wrote everything. John produced everything. John sang lead on everything. The other three were essentially his backing band, and they knew it. The music projected brotherhood, but the creative process was a dictatorship. Success was moving faster than anyone could control, and the river they sang about was about to carry them into dangerous waters. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. In 1969 alone, CCR released 3 platinum albums: Bayou Country, Green River, and Willie and the Poor Boys. 3 platinum albums in a single year. They followed that with Cosmo's Factory in 1970, which topped the charts. During this 24-month period, Creedence Clearwater Revival became arguably the most played band on American radio. Bad Moon Rising, Green River, Down on the Corner, Fortunate Son, Travelin' Band, Up Around the Bend, Looking Out My Back Door, hit after hit after hit, each one becoming an instant classic, each one dominating radio playlists across the country. Fortunate Son was especially powerful. John's rage about draft inequality, forged during those long marches at Fort Knox, exploded into 3 minutes of pure working-class fury. It ain't me, I ain't no senator's son. It became the anthem of every soldier who felt betrayed by a system that protected the wealthy while sending the poor to die. But there was a curse embedded in all this success, a bizarre twist that haunted the band. They had 9 singles reach the top 10, but 5 of them stalled at number 2. Proud Mary, number 2. Bad Moon Rising, number 2. Green River, number 2. Travelin' Band, number 2. Looking Out My Back Door, number 2. Despite their dominance, despite the massive sales and constant radio play, they never achieved a number 1 hit, the curse of second place. Then came Woodstock, and with it, another cruel twist of fate. August 1969. 500,000 people gathered in upstate New York for what would become the defining moment of the counterculture. CCR was a major act, scheduled to play during prime time, but the Grateful Dead's extended drug-fueled set pushed CCR's performance past midnight. John Fogerty later described it with bitter clarity. Creedence famously had issues because we were on so late and the audience was asleep, mostly caused by hippie dysfunction. During our performance at Woodstock, you had 500,000 people asleep. It was the middle of the night. They played brilliantly, but to an exhausted, half-conscious crowd. And then John made a decision that would haunt them forever. When he saw early footage, he deemed it not remarkable and pulled their performance from the iconic Woodstock film and soundtrack. His perfectionism, his need for absolute control, robbed them of cultural immortality. While other bands achieved legendary status through that film, CCR disappeared from one of rock's defining moments. The band that should have owned 1969 was somehow watching their triumph slip away, overshadowed by bad luck and John's uncompromising vision. They were standing at the absolute peak of their power, unaware that the cracks in the foundation were about to become chasms. The success that should have united them instead became poison. As the hits mounted, so did the resentment. John controlled everything. The songwriting, the production, the arrangements, every detail. Stu Cook and Doug Clifford felt like hired hands in their own band. But the deepest wound was inflicted on Tom Fogerty, John's older brother, the man who had been there from the beginning, now marginalized in the band he helped create. John later admitted the truth with painful honesty. The relationship part with the band was not there at all. I mean, woeful. He genuinely didn't understand why his bandmates were angry. They were making hit after hit. They were conquering the world. What more did they want? The answer was simple, and John would eventually understand it. They wanted to contribute. They wanted to be more than background players in someone else's vision. They wanted to matter. In 1971, CCR released Have You Ever Seen the Rain? It peaked at number 8, another classic destined for immortality. But the song's meaning was darker than most listeners realized. John later explained it was about the band's deteriorating state. It's the brightest blue, wonderful day that we all dreamed about. and it's raining. What are you guys so unhappy about?
Have you ever seen rain?
He couldn't comprehend it. They were at the top. The dream had come true. Why was it raining? The breaking point came when Tom Fogerty quit in 1971. John's own brother, walking away from everything they'd built together. John recalled Tom becoming really quiet, walking on eggshells, delivering little jabs every now and then before making his final departure. The original vision of brotherhood was officially dead. But John, stubborn and determined to prove his point, made one final, catastrophic decision. He insisted the remaining trio record the 1972 album Mardi Gras under a forced democracy. Stu Cook and Doug Clifford would contribute songs, production, and lead vocals equally alongside John. It was a test, and John knew it. He wanted to prove that without his absolute control, the band would fail. And he was right. Mardi Gras was critically savaged. The uneven quality, the lack of cohesive vision, the absence of John's singular genius, it all proved his point. But it also guaranteed the end. He'd won the argument and destroyed the band in the process. Following a disastrous final tour that critics called a ghost of what was, Creedence Clearwater Revival disbanded in late 1972. 4 high school friends who had dreamed together, struggled together, and conquered the world together now couldn't stand to be in the same room. The music had survived, the brotherhood had not. The breakup was just the beginning of the nightmare. John Fogerty became consumed by his fight against Saul Zaentz, the owner of Fantasy Records. John felt the original contract terms were unfair and onerous, a classic case of young musicians being exploited by savvy industry executives. In protest, he made a vow that would define the next 2 decades of his life. He would never perform his CCR hits again. They belonged to Fantasy, and he refused to make another dollar for the man who had betrayed him. Then, in 1985, something almost unbelievable happened. John had launched a successful solo comeback with the album Centerfield, which included the hit The Old Man Down the Road. Zaentz sued him, claiming the song was plagiarism, not of someone else's work, but of John's own 1970 CCR song, Run Through the Jungle, which Zaentz owned the publishing rights to. Think about that. A man was being sued for plagiarizing himself. It was a legal absurdity designed to control every aspect of John's creative fingerprint. John ultimately won, performing both songs in court to prove their differences. But the trauma of the battle defined his career. He'd placed 2 songs attacking Zaentz on Centerfield, Mr. Greed, and what was later retitled Vans Can't Dance, making his bitterness a permanent part of his artistic legacy. But the deepest tragedy was yet to come. In the legal battles against John, Tom Fogerty sided with Zaentz, with John saying Tom and the record label were like best friends. John described it as being like a dagger in my heart at the time. His own brother, choosing the corporate enemy over blood. They never reconciled. Tom Fogerty died in 1990, and John was left with a permanent wound that would never heal. The brotherhood that had started in a garage in California, built on dreams and loyalty, had ended in betrayal and bitterness. The final public confirmation came at the 1993 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony. CCR was inducted, a long overdue recognition of their massive influence. But John Fogerty refused to perform with Stu Cook and Doug Clifford. Instead, he played his songs with session musicians like Bruce Springsteen and Robbie Robertson. Cook and Clifford, humiliated and furious, walked out of the ballroom. The world watched as the band that had once sung about unity and shared struggle couldn't even share a stage for 5 minutes. The dream hadn't just died. It had been publicly executed. Despite decades of acrimony, lawsuits, and broken relationships, the music refused to die. CCR's catalog, created during that brief 4-year window from 1968 to 1972, became the soundtrack to a generation. Fortunate Son appeared in countless Vietnam War films, including Forrest Gump in 1994, cementing its status as the definitive anti-war anthem of the era. The digital age proved that simple, powerful rock built on tight riffs and authentic emotion never goes out of style. While many of their psychedelic contemporaries struggled with lengthy experimental tracks that didn't fit streaming formats, CCR's concise, radio-ready hits found new life. The band's total streams as a lead artist now exceed 10.2 billion. Have You Ever Seen the Rain became the oldest song to receive over 1 billion streams. In 2024, Rolling Stone declared them the biggest band in America. But the most important chapter of the story came in 2023, when John Fogerty finally achieved what he'd fought for his entire adult life. He reclaimed ownership of his publishing rights from Fantasy Records. After 5 decades of legal warfare, he finally owned his own music again. To celebrate this victory, John began re-recording the CCR classics with his sons, Shane and Tyler. The music that had caused so much pain, that had destroyed his relationship with his brother and bandmates, was now a joyful family project. He was passing the legacy to the next generation, transforming bitterness into celebration. And in that process, John found a way to make peace with his past. He consciously chose to forgive Tom for siding with Zaynts. He described feeling happy and positive toward Tom, finally letting go of the anger that had poisoned so many years. The boy who had marched at Fort Knox, who had channeled his rage about injustice into timeless protest songs, who had controlled every aspect of his music at the cost of every relationship in his life, had finally found something that eluded him for decades: peace. Creedence Clearwater Revival proved that the greatest music often comes from the deepest pain. 4 working-class kids created an American soundtrack that outlasted their brotherhood, their lawsuits, and their bitterness. The curse of number 2 never broke them. Corporate betrayal couldn't silence them. Even death couldn't erase what they built. In the end, the music won. What's your favorite CCR memory? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of rock's greatest triumphs and tragedies.